My fellow people of YouTube, I believe in a just world and a sane world where an individual is free to live without fear of persecution or prejudice, where creativity is encouraged and no unusual solution to a problem is met with not ridicule but with praise. My hope is that we can instill these values on a blanket scale across society and hopefully use them to improve lives of many people worldwide. And only then can we stride into the new that really hurt. QuickTime events sure are a silly thing. I know why so many games use them and they're not automatically terrible, since there's plenty of cases where games have used them correctly, but I never like games that rely on QTEs. Gaming is such an involved experience that needs more feedback from the player than one or two button presses to activate some contextual prompt that doesn't match the effort of what's happening on screen. If someone is leaping out of the way of an object hurtling at them, me pressing one button on a controller while reclined in my chair isn't going to do it for me. So today, I want to look at some of the worst QuickTime events around that are badly integrated into their scenarios, or come out of nowhere to kill the player in a cutscene, or even just deprive you of something way cooler, because when a game is capable of so much more, these things just feel like a cop-out. A lazy solution to a problem that they've made themselves. All I ask is for a little more effort and a little less random button presses. I reckon that's doable. I'm sorry, but I can't make a video about QuickTime events without talking about David Cage. It's just one of those facts of life, like how Breath of the Wild 2 was a fever dream we all had collectively, and how the Bird app will make you stupid, but David Cage especially is a guy who loves his video games cinematic and just slightly too pretentious to take seriously. The big hitters in his game library are all these cutscene heavy story focused adventures that encourage player choice with a selection of endings, taken to the logical extreme with Detroit Become Human that is a whole bag of bungled allegories and about as subtle as eating a landmine. I do like these games, but I think they love themselves a bit too much, to the extent that QuickTime events are everywhere and often very badly implemented, with Heavy Rain's Jason moment comfortably top of the pile. Hey, it's a serious moment where Ethan Mars has lost his son in a crowded shopping mall and is frantically looking for him and screaming his name and... Jason! Oh no, it's terrible. There's a few too many moments in Heavy Rain that are trying to be emotional and dramatic, but they fall just a little bit short, in a way that is so noticeable that it kind of becomes hilarious. And it's a bit like the uncanny valley, that as soon as you get closer to being correct and dramatic, you fall at the hurdle right at the end, and it actually becomes really hilarious. The opening couple of scenes in Heavy Rain are a little strange. The game is trying to set up this idyllic slice of life that Ethan is living with his family and demonstrating how wonderful everything is, as a way of contrasting how bleak and depressing life becomes for Ethan after the prologue. The first real moment of conflict comes from when Ethan loses track of Jason in the crowds, and this small problem snowballs into the death of his son and his life collapsing into a grey puddle of goo. That would potentially be a powerful moment in the story, but unfortunately, someone gave me a button that I can press that makes Ethan say Jason in one of 3 hilarious ways, and that's frankly all I can focus on now. Jason! It's almost like he's irritated by all of this and feels inconvenienced by having to track down his son, which I don't think is what they were going for. Still, it makes for one of the more memorable scenes in Heavy Rain, if just for that one time that David Cage decided that I needed a Jason button. Special mention to the glitch associated with the sequence that still isn't fixed all these years later, where sometimes the QT will pop up during the small cutscenes dotted throughout, and you can scream Jason into a little child's face. Jason! These games sure aren't boring, that's for sure. I would love to know why the smart people behind the Resident Evil games decided to use so many QuickTime events. I kind of get the appeal with how QTEs could be used to help avoid a fail state from a jump scare, but bizarrely, Resident Evil only started using QuickTime events once it had moved away from horror and veered into the survival horror action lane, which I suppose works as a way of getting the player more involved and helping to blur the line between horror and action even further, but I don't know, I've never really enjoyed QTEs in these games. Aside from Chris Redfield punching the hell out of that boulder like it owes him money, that man gets some serious gains. When it isn't going for full-on horror, Resident Evil is at its best when it's embracing its origins as an homage to B-movie horror and campy dialogue that takes itself seriously in the moment, but overall, it's all a bit silly and relatively self-aware. Self-awareness is in critically short supply during the knife fight with Jack Krauser from Resident Evil 4, where this game has the audacity to grind this fun survival horror game to a shuddering halt for a boss fight entirely played out in a cutscene with QuickTime events. Do you even need me to tell you why this isn't such a good idea? Resi 4 has a few moments in it that don't exactly play to its strengths, but I reckon a QTE-ridden set of cutscenes that act as some kind of boss fight is very off-piste for this kind of game. Even with Resident Evil 4 lacing in a few more QuickTime events than your average Resi game, it is a uniquely bizarre moment that is never developed later in the game. You do fight Krauser a second time much later, but this time it isn't in a cutscene that you can't just sit back and enjoy because some genius decided to fill it full of button prompts. The line between success and a grisly knife-related death is very fine, with each prompt only having a few moments for the player to rush an input in, but also it pretends to have some kind of consistency to it, with how the prompts seem to be the same, but then randomly switch to the shoulder buttons, and then how about this? The bit near the end, where Krauser has Leon pinned and you need to spam one button? Yeah, the button changes halfway through, with no warning. Which means if you're really focused on pressing that button and aren't looking at the screen, well, you're now dead. Are boss fights so hard to make? Was Resident Evil 4 required to have so many boss battles and the devs had to pull one out of nowhere to meet their quota? Or is this genuinely some kind of attempt at injecting variety into the boss lineup with some gameplay that barely feels like a video game? Did you know this game is trying to be a horror game? Why'd you put a knife fight in my horror game? Oh, I really love it when my fast, stylized action game slows everything down for some QuickTime events. Actually, to be fair, this isn't such a bad thing, but it needs to be reliable. No More Heroes games work really nicely because QTEs are used as finishers with both individual enemies and on a grander scale at the end of boss fights, and for the most part, God of War works in the same way. I'm less inclined to give those games any massive praise since you do mash buttons to get chests open and do puzzles, but at the same time, there's some pretty ridiculous finishes in there too, and I don't think any QuickTime event has made me wince like the end of the fight with Poseidon. Oh god, oh yeah, genuinely every time. Platinum Games wanted a piece of that action and so brought Bayonetta to the table in 2009, a welcome addition to the stylized action genre that tends to stay away from QuickTime events, usually saving them for some sexualized finishes mid-combat. This is fine, and if I have to press a button that augments the fighting that I'm already doing with something flashy, then yeah, you got yourself a deal. Where everything starts to fall apart is when the QuickTime events interrupt cutscenes, which admittedly doesn't happen often, but that's actually much worse. I'd rather they were more common, because at least then I know to expect them, but Bayonetta has like 3 of them in the whole game, and the QTE at the end of Chapter 2 has a timing window so tiny that even if you know it's coming, you're still very likely to fuck it up multiple times in a row. No, seriously, you can know what to do and what button to press, but you'd be surprised how little that matters when you've only got a couple of frames to play with. There's a boss fight before this, an obstacle designed to be a major roadblock to your forward progression. I don't know why they bothered, the QTE is way more challenging. You could have saved some time there, guys. This QuickTime event sounds terrible, and trust me, it is, but the only thing saving it from actually being the worst and this being the end of the video is the fact that just before you get to the prompt, you do get a checkpoint, so if you fail, you can just retry straight away instead of having to fight the entire boss fight. But this just brings up the ridiculous scenario where you retry a bunch of times and actually see more game over screens than you are playing the video game. Like, surely playtesters would have noticed this. Hey, does anyone remember when Call of Duty was respectable? Oh god. Oh, I can't. Nah, but seriously, it did happen, even if it does feel like yonks ago, because Call of Duty got into the pattern of regurgitating content and settings and just making the same game year in, year out, to the point where the fans became sick of it, and then they overcompensated and overcorrected way too far and leapt forward into the future and basically became Halo. Surely, there is a middle ground that is a little less stupid? It feels like so long ago since I first played Advanced Warfare and thought that it was a semi-decent take on what was a tired formula even back in 2014, which, by the way, is technically a long time ago, but don't you tell me that 2014 was 7 years ago or I'll smack you. It is a damn shame that people don't remember Advanced Warfare as the pretty okay game that it is, because it came at a time when the modern day setting was basically milked dry and was more of a gentle easing into futuristic tech instead of how Infinite Warfare went to space and didn't come back. I may exist in my own flimsy bubble for appreciating a good chunk of what this game did right, but also, there's only one reason why anyone has ever heard of this game, and that's because of a scene where you need to be respectful at a funeral. Ah yes, the perfect time for a QuickTime event. He was a good man with a strong heart and a love for life that endured throughout the many hardships that he tackled on a day-to-day basis. May his soul be one with the earth. I should really pay my respects. I'd love to know how many people know which game Press F to pay respects comes from, because this is something so ridiculous, so accidentally hilarious, that it was able to transcend Advanced Warfare in a way that Call of Duty doesn't usually experience. Most of the time you hear people talk about the multiplayer or the zombies, but in 2014, all the dialogue was about how this stupid funeral scene designed to move the plot forward with Kevin Spacey recruiting you to his army before he leaves to touch up some kids was dominated by just 5 little words at the bottom of the screen. A button prompt to tell you to do the one thing that annihilates immersion and breaks down any walls that the game was setting up. You might have well have said something like press F to cry or press F to feel pride in your latest headshot. It's so inadvertently wonderful that the internet picked it up in 2014 and have basically ran with it ever since, with a lifespan far exceeding the majority of memes out there. It was so out of place that people still get off leaving Fs in chat. This is where all of that comes from, a serious funeral scene designed to be the kicking off point for the rest of the game. Call of Duty needs to stick to what it's good at. Whatever the hell that is nowadays. QuickTime events popping up in places they don't belong is something that is perfectly characterized by the QuickTime boss fight. We've seen the dangers of doing this in a game that has combat that doesn't mesh well with the stop-start nature of the QTEs in a cutscene, but how bad do you reckon things would get if you had expectations before starting the fight? Krauser leaps out of nowhere in Resi 4, and once you get that initial prompt, the game commits to this QTE boss fight and you strap yourself in for this very disappointing ride. What about the final boss to a really fun and enjoyable game that fails to tap into anything that made the previous couple dozen hours so entertaining? Finally, the end of Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor is useful for something. Honestly, how do you do everything right for so long with a unique flavor of finding enemies who can have overarching stories and remember any interactions that you've had in the past, which was so amazing and successful that you did some bullshit pattern on it this year, and yet end everything with an incredible letdown of a final boss? It's like the perfect letdown in a way, since you're fighting Sauron, which isn't too shocking for a game set in the Lord of the Rings universe, but we never really see a lot of him in either film trilogy. They tease Sauron so hard in these films, but never really show much of a fight with him, clearing the runway for Shadow of Mordor to blow us all away with a hugely anticipated fight against one of the most iconic villains in all of fiction. No, but I can do you a weird fight against some guy who Sauron inhabits the body of that all plays out with QuickTime events. The visuals are awesome, and what's led to this moment is pretty cool too, but the fight itself is over inside 30 seconds and leans on a feature that was barely a part of this game. Shadow of Mordor has so much going for it, and this is how you want to end things? At least you get to fight Sauron in the DLC, but I don't want to have to buy additional content to get the final boss that I feel like this game deserves. What are you, Asura's Wrath? This is RabbidLuigi, and it is possible that there were other plans for how the fight with Sauron was going to go down at the end of Shadow of Mordor, but either tight deadlines or the need to keep something aside for DLC meant that we got this absolutely terrible boss fight instead, which you just don't do with Sauron, one of the most iconic villains in all of fiction. It's like Bowser being defeated in a cutscene or Eggman dying off screen. You just don't do it. This is the climax of your video game, and it's all over and done with in about 30 seconds. You know, I wish you wasted my time a bit more. Hi, just want to give a quick shout out to some of my top supporters on Patreon. We have Ramon Alberto, Jerome Kiryu, Fusion Warrior, Sarah Malion, Christopher Robinson, Joe Creamer, and Scott Riker. Thank you all for supporting what I do on YouTube, and if you want to join them, you can go to patreon.com/RabbidLuigi, where I post updates and behind the scenes stuff, and we generally have a really good time. Also, what topic would you like to see me cover next? Leave your suggestion in a comment on this video, because I'll be taking the best ideas and making a poll on my community tab, which you can then vote on to decide what the next video is about. I'll be announcing the winner of the poll over on my Twitter, so make sure you follow me so you don't miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.